Hey, what's up, you guys? It's another Truth Talk Thursday, and today I'm doing my husband and wife Q&A. So everyone, this is my husband, Jose.
Hi, guys.
We've never done this before, so we're kind of excited. You guys asked some awesome questions. We were going over some of the questions you guys were asking, and we were just so surprised at just how real and raw that you guys were kind of just processing through. Some of those questions you guys are really just kind of going after. And so thank you so much for asking such good questions, and let's get started.
So question number one.
So the first question is, how do you know when you are ready for a relationship? Figuring out a timeline that is best for a specific relationship, knowing when you are ready to enter one, how long you should date for that particular relationship, and good ways to see the true character of a potential spouse.
That could be its own video. My gosh.
All by itself.
Yeah. So why don't you start?
Okay, so some of the notes that I wrote down in terms of knowing when you are ready is, we are the biggest obstacle when it comes to our relationships. And that can be not just marriage, but it can also mean friendships. And so something that I have had to really learn in terms of knowing when I am ready, or knowing when I was ready, was knowing that I am the biggest obstacle in my relationship. I am the biggest enemy. Is if I am not taking care of what I need to in terms of going after God and going after my sin and picking up my cross and all of those things, our relationship can't happen. It's so easy to point the finger and point it at somebody else, but the biggest obstacle in our relationships is actually ourselves.
Yeah, so I would say, to kind of go off of that, if you are a young woman and you're trying to figure out, am I ready to be in a relationship? I think what you really need to think about is, am I emotionally healthy as a single person? Because if you're not, being in a relationship, whether that's just dating or marriage, isn't gonna make things any better. It's not gonna, to be cliche, complete you, right? It's not gonna make those feelings of loneliness and stuff go away. It's gonna mask it. So I think your first question should be, am I okay being single? And if not, pursue that first. Go after Jesus in that. Spend your time getting to know him and growing as a person, and that's where you'll find yourself becoming more ready. And the cool thing is, the side effect is, the kind of guys that you want to be with, the kind of guys that love Jesus and will pursue you well, are going to be attracted to a young woman who's walking towards Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely.
In terms of, you also asked, how long should you date in a particular relationship, right? I think, so for us, we went from starting to date to engagement a year. We early on knew that we really wanted to be together for the long term, but in terms of getting engaged and kind of seeing in each other, right? A lot of different periods in our lives, good times, bad times, hard times, sad times. I think a year just really gives you a good round, a
good full scope of
somebody. Everyone's a little different, right? So don't take that as a make it or break it. Oh my God, we're 11 months. No, no, it just think about it in that way. It's you want to see someone in all seasons of life, and that's going to give you a good round picture. The other thing is kind of seeing their character. I think a big one for me is, how do they treat their family? How do they treat your family? Whether you're 16 or 26, this is going to be a big tell. So I'll give you guys an example. So I was actually in a fraternity when I was in college, because I wanted to bring Jesus to the fraternity guys. But what was really interesting to see is that they treated Melanie a whole lot different than they treated every other girl, because they saw her as an extension of me and how I carried myself. And because they said as much to me, they treated her with way more respect, which that's a whole other thing that I tried to teach them. But they treated her with way more respect because they saw how I treated her, and so that, in hindsight, is a good sign of that. So if his friends are making fun of you, if his friends are treating you badly, or the opposite, if they treat you with a lot of respect, that's going to say a lot about him.
Yeah. In terms of some of the things that I said in terms of kind of getting to know that true character of someone, I said observe them not only in their victories, but also their failures. Seeing them in their low points and observing them in their low points is going to be a real good tell of what their character is. I said allow for moments of vulnerability. I know something that can be hard for men is to really be vulnerable and get to a point where they can openly share their emotions. And so that is something that you are definitely going to want to have in a future relationship, spouse, whatever that looks like. And so definitely look for an opportunity to create moments of vulnerability. And then lastly, serve with them. Something that really attracted me to Jose was the fact that he loved to serve, whether it was high schoolers in ministry, or even just being at a grocery store and really trying to be loving and caring to the cashier. It's those little moments that share so much. But it's also those big moments too. So if you are looking for someone and you want to get to know them and see their true character, definitely serve with them.
Okay, so how do you balance different communication styles and needs in a relationship?
Mm-hmm. So, do you want me to start?
Yeah.
Okay, so balancing communication styles. I know, at least for us, I had to learn very quickly that Jose is very different than I am. I'm more extroverted. I have different extroverted needs. He's more introverted and he has more introverted needs. And something that was super cool that I had to learn was the fact that because he is introverted and I'm extroverted, I had to learn very quickly that those are good things. Those are things that God uniquely wired him to be that way. And for a while there, I would say that I actually resisted that. I always, for some reason, I thought that being extroverted was the way to go. That is awesome. And I tried to kind of push that on you, and you're like, actually, this is how God wired me, and this is good. And it was good, because to be honest with you, I was able to learn so much from the fact that he is uniquely different than me. I learned that because I'm an extroverted person and love to communicate and talk with people, I realized I had a really hard time being alone by myself, which then also trickled into being alone with the Lord. And so I realized that my intimate relationship with Jesus was kind of faltering at times, because I didn't know how to be alone with him, because a lot of that was in my social time, I guess I would say.
I think in general, just the feedback that I would say is we have to view communication as a service, right? So it is not like you just want to spout out what's in your head and it's up to the other person to figure out what you've said and make sense of it. No, that's a disservice. Think about it as, I have something in my head that I have to figure out how are you going to understand me the best way, right? And so if you have two people in a relationship that are both approaching communication as a service, trying to serve the other person, it's going to go really well. And the Bible paints a really good picture of just marriage in general, but I think communication, especially in Ephesians 5, when it talks about the husband being like Christ and laying down his own life for the wife, and the wife being like the church and dying to self and following the husband. And so it's not that the husband is, the boss and gets to do whatever he wants. No, It's this beautiful picture of as the wife provides respect, the husband provides love by dying to self, which in turn makes it easier for her to respect, which in turn makes it easier for him to love. And so I think if we approach communication in that way, it's definitely a recipe for success.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I have here, how do we balance communication needs? So not just the styles, but also the needs. And for me, this has come up so many times, is the fact that in terms of needs, I need to make sure that I am someone who is not just talking, but I am more so listening. So definitely, at least for Jose and I, this is something that has been really big in the fact that I am a natural talker. Like I said, I'm an extroverted person. I can totally dominate a conversation. It's not hard for me to do that. And so for me, I've been really having to learn how to be present, and being present also means listening. And if I'm being honest, a lot of the best moments in terms of our communication in our marriage has been when I've kind of zipped my lips and I've actually listened to him. And it's crazy to think oh, obviously those things seem obvious, but some of our most greatest moments, for me at least, is when I'm not talking and I'm listening to him and hearing all the things and great things that he has to say.
I think for me it's two things. So one, and it sounds really obvious, right? But she doesn't want me to fix everything. And that's the stereotypical one, but it's very true. I'm a fixer. And it's literally what I do at work. I'm in IT. I fix things. I fix problems. And so with her, I've had to ask her, hey, can you tell me when you want to vent? Or tell me when you want advice? So that I know. It's a reminder for me, right? And that takes me being self-aware to know that maybe I'm not good at that, so that I can tell her to serve me by reminding me. And then the other thing is I very quickly put my needs as second. So
Yeah.
I have to make sure that I'm bringing up my needs and being vulnerable and being like, hey, I need space. Or hey, I need even as simple as saying I need a hug, that can be difficult for me to say. And so it's just kind of learning to communicate those things.
Yeah, absolutely. The next question is, everyone always says that God has to be the priority in the relationship, which is 100% true. But what does that look like practically? So basically, how do you practically keep God at the center of your relationship?
So again, this kind of goes back to, are you a healthy single Christ follower, right? If you're single and you have Christ at the center of your life, it's naturally going to reflect in your relationship. In Loveology, there's a really good John Mark Comer quote where he says, if the point of your relationship is your relationship, it will fail. And I think that that's just a very practical way of like, if you're with this person because you think they're going to make you happy, or you think that this is your best path towards having kids and a family, right? If your relationship becomes about anything other than Christ, right, it's going to naturally fail. And so like, what are some practical ways of that? I think we're naturally always pointing each other up to Christ, right? So the relationship isn't about me being happy or her being happy. It's about the two of us becoming more like Christ. And that's really it. It sounds really simple, or it sounds like overly simple, like oh, how practical is that? But no, like that's really how it applies, right? So when you've had a bad day, or she's had a bad day, right? Or or we've got some sort of conflict, or we're trying to communicate something, like ultimately, why am I doing this? Am I doing this because it's for me, or for her, or for Christ, right? And so we just try to keep that in mind as much as possible, and it shapes us, and it can lead to some harder conversations, right? Like there are times where, just like there's times we have to choose what I want and what God wants, right? There's times where we have to choose between what each other wants to hear or wants to do and what we feel God is calling us to, right? And it's honoring God in that.
Yeah. My side of this is really just learning how to have a flourishing relationship with Jesus, separate from your the person you're dating or your spouse, or whatever that looks like. And so for me, it was really making sure that I am getting my alone time with the Lord, that I am watering my relationship with Him, and that is flourishing separate from Jose. So that's what that looked like for me, is really like going after having alone time with the Lord, and then even like in Bible reading. So, that could look like in prayer, that could look like in reading the Bible. For us, like we both separately love reading the Bible on our own, and then we come together and we share the things that God has laid on our hearts, or the things that we found that was really exciting in our time with the Lord.
And that's not always easy.
Yeah.
Like, because we do, we talked earlier about like different communication styles. We have different learning styles. We have different paces at which we like to talk about it. So for us, that's been a learning experience, right? Of like, how do we come together well? And then just a little interjection, like, yes, she's responsible for her own growth. But as the male, like what comes along with that headship is I have a role to play in that, right? So we're married, right? So if we go to church, I can't go thinking that like I'm good to go, and if she's not good, like that's on her. Like I have a role to play in whether I like hinder or enable her to go after God. And so I have to balance both of those. And so the last question for today is, how do you love each other well? How do you keep boundaries when you're married? What boundaries do you set? Do you even have physical boundaries? How did you know you were ready for marriage? And what fears did you have being in a relationship, and how did you conquer them? That is more than one question. Whoever submitted this, you cheated. But we will answer them as best we can.
They're great questions.
So why don't you start?
Okay, cool. So in terms of loving each other well, I wrote here, really yield to each other's strengths. There are things that I've learned about Jose that he is really strong in that area, and that's actually a weakness of mine, and vice versa. He's found areas that I have strengths in that he's weaker in. And so loving each other well is really going after that understanding that each other are going to have strengths and weaknesses, but also encouraging each other in growing in those weaknesses, because we are trying to go after Christ, which means that we are not going to stay the same, especially in marriage.
Right. I think the way that plays out for me with my wife, and I think for a lot of men with their wives, is just kind of working on your patience, love, kindness, and gentleness, which we know are all fruits of the Spirit, right? But specifically, the Bible calls men in 1 Peter 3:7 to live with their wives in an understanding way. And so I think for me, that plays out in she views the world a little differently than I do. I can be very minimalist and utilitarian, and and I tend to think that's good and that's the way to be, but like she views the world through a different lens, and she sees beauty and she wants to stop and smell the roses, and I'm like, we're gonna be late, and it's kind of understanding that's okay, that like that she has maybe slightly different priorities than I do, and that's okay, like that she learns in a different way than I do. Maybe I learn quicker or in a different way, and when I get frustrated with her, that just makes the problem worse. So I need to make sure that I'm living in an understanding way, that I'm honoring her needs, honoring the way she communicates, honoring how she wants to approach a certain thing. Even just I'm the one that cooks, and so even like honoring that maybe she wants to eat something different, right, or that kind of thing, right? So it's just on a very practical level, right? It's just I think that verse sums it up so well. Like I want to live with my wife in an understanding way, and that's really challenging sometimes, right? Because I'm self-centered, right? By default, we all are.
Yeah.
So.
My other point is be each other's second pair of eyes, or the reflection on the mirror. And so if we really are, going after Christ, we are not going to stay the same. And so marriage, like we always say, like marriage is the fast track to sanctification. And so one of those things that we've really had to realize in terms of loving each other well is making sure that we are not staying the same person that we were before. And so it's really being that second pair of eyes and enduring those hard conversations. Proverbs 27:17 says, iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. And that is not more true than what I have found in marriage, is that we are really sharpening one another to become more like Christ and bear the image of Christ. And that can be difficult, but that is the purpose. That is what we are called to do. And I don't think we can say at any point that we haven't pushed one another and it wasn't worth it, and we look back and we're like, oh, thanks for challenging me, that wasn't really what I wanted. I think we can look back and see that all of the times that we've really pointed at the reflection in the mirror, it was worth it, and it was God honoring.
Right, and even like the iron sharpens iron thing. I don't know how many of you guys have actually done any blacksmithing, but when you do that, there's sparks, there's heat, right? It's not a soft and easy process, right? So I think it's good to remember that that's going to happen, and conflict's going to happen. But that's okay, right? It's all in how you handle that. So
yeah, I feel like that verse can sometimes be glamorized, and it's like, no, that's really hard.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So then the second one is the boundaries. So just to kind of go off the question, how do you keep boundaries when you're married? What boundaries do you set? Do you even have physical boundaries? And so for me, that was learning that in terms of boundaries, it was learning that there are things that I'm going to have to put in place to better understand him and to also serve him well. And so I'm an extrovert. I love to talk. I love to be social. I learned that I wasn't able to maybe communicate in a certain way because he wasn't ready to hear it, or say it was a long day at work and he comes through the door. I have to be understanding in that he may not be ready to hear all of the things and all of the emotions that I have to share, and that's okay. And it's okay to have the communication of saying, hey, are you ready to have this conversation? And if it's no, I have to be okay with that, because that's a healthy boundary he's placing. And if he is ready, awesome, we can have a great conversation.
So in general, I think it's good to say boundaries are healthy.
Yes.
Boundaries are good. Boundaries are going to help you figure out where you end and the next person begins, whether that's family, friendships, or relationships. And so in general, I kind of tend to view boundaries, there's like two different types, like the internal ones that I keep within myself, right? And then the external ones. So a good example of an internal one is I like to help. Probably a little bit too much. I'm a fixer, right? So I'm an analyst. What I do at work is basically fix problems with technology, and sometimes I want to come home and just fix everything. And as you probably know, most women don't want men to fix it. They want them to listen and to walk with them through it. And so I have to internally know, like, I need to not do this, or I need to not let myself feel like I'm doing something wrong if I'm not fixing it, right? Like I need to, internally there's certain thoughts that I just know to be false that I have to make sure I'm staying on top of. And then externally, I think it's always good to know like who's responsible for what, right? When it comes to communication, right? If I did my best to communicate and I said something and she said, okay, right? She said, okay, or vice versa, right? If she says, hey, are you feeling okay? And I go, nope, I'm fine, right? I can't get mad at her and go, how could you not know that nope meant, oh, I'm feeling terrible, right? Like that helps in conflict resolution. It's where that plays out a lot, right? Of knowing who's responsible for what. And I think just having a lot of grace with one another helps a ton in terms of that. So in terms of physical boundaries, I think number one, if you're not married, just seek purity, right? Like if you find your heart going towards like, where's the line so I can tiptoe, right? Like that's the wrong attitude, right? You wanna know as a Christian, if you see that's the line, I want to be over there. I want to be far, far away from that line. And then if you're in a relationship where you don't feel like you can do that, if you're in a relationship where you're like, oh, I don't know if I can bring that up, that's gonna be weird, right? Don't walk away, run away, right? Like it's just
seriously,
it's just gonna bring hurt and trouble. So yeah, start the relationship off on the right foot on that. If you're already in a relationship and you feel like it's already in the wrong foot, have that conversation sooner than later, and that's a deal breaker, right? If the other person if the man isn't gonna respect you in that way, right? And it goes back to being a healthy single, right? So if you know what it means to be pure, right, and you bring that in a relationship, if another person doesn't want to respect that, they're not worth your time and effort. And then if you're married, are there physical boundaries? Yeah, sometimes. In general, I think it's a journey that you're going to take together, and it requires a lot of grace and patience with one another. As you figure it out, everyone's going to kind of walk in with different levels of comfort around intimacy, depending on your history, depending on where you've been. So you want to walk through that together and make sure you do it in a way that honors the both of you.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Anything to add?
I would just say like, whether you are looking to be married one day or you are married, at this current moment, I would say that embrace those conversations, allow for there to be just a lot of vulnerability in those conversations, because that's going to yield the best results. Be real, have vulnerability, and really just go after one another in that type of way, because that's also a great way of loving one another and serving one another, is kind of, again, like enduring through those harder conversations, knowing that it will yield good fruit.
Yeah. So the last part of the question is, how did you know you were ready for marriage? What fears did you have being in a relationship? And how did you conquer them? So why don't you start?
Okay, so something for me that I realized very early is that I knew that I was not ready for marriage. There was a lot of things that I was very insecure about in terms of being a wife, let alone a godly wife. And so something that for me worked really well was that I observed and pursued couples in my life who had really fruitful and healthy, flourishing marriages. And I asked them if I could learn from them, and they got to know me, and they shared some of the things that they saw that were weaknesses in my own walk. And so that was very just eye-opening for me, because I was not only able to observe a healthy marriage and learn from them, but they were also able to speak into my life as someone or people who are married, and could see areas where I would need to definitely kind of tweak some things. The other thing that I found that was so helpful was counseling. And for me, counseling was just this huge, I don't know, like it was just so eye-opening. I keep on saying eye-opening, but really getting ready for marriage is so eye-opening. And counseling for me was just a great way of realizing that we are imperfect people, and therefore we are going to be coming from imperfect families, and there's going to be things that are unhealthy and also things that are healthy in terms of your upbringing. And as people, we are always going to bring those things into how we interact with the world, how we interact in our marriages and relationships. And so for me, counseling was really great in terms of learning practical ways to learn how to communicate well and have healthy conflict resolution and really process through my past experiences as well as past emotions that I may not have dealt with otherwise. That would have been very healthy for my future marriage.
I think kind of going off of that, something my family does, which is really good, but can also be like kind of hurtful, is helping too much. My family, that's like a boundary issue that I'm kind of realizing is part of my family culture, where we love helping to the point where we can end up helping too much. And I mentioned that earlier because that's something I've been realizing in myself, that I tend to do too much. But in terms of knowing when I was ready for marriage, so I always knew I wanted to get married. I always knew, like, I always wanted to be in a relationship, right? And again, that kind of goes back to the being a healthy single. But I got to the point where I was pretty much, pretty good being healthy and being single and seeking Christ. Ended up in a relationship with this girl that was really nice. She was Christian. But I was like, all right, God, like, what's next? Like, pursuing marriage. I don't even know what marriage means. So I start, reading this book called Loveology by John Mark Comer. And I end up realizing that, like, so the way he lays it out is Genesis has the framework for what marriage is supposed to be about, right? So he calls it gardening, which is what we would call like a calling, and then friendship, like this other person is going to be your best friend, like family. Do you have the same ideas for family? Intimacy, right? Obviously that's part of marriage as well. And then becoming more like Jesus. And so I started looking at that relationship and all the past relationships and realizing, oh, this is why these relationships don't work. This is why I'm kind of not seeing the finish line here, because we don't really match up with the purpose of marriage. The sake of these relationships was the relationship. And so when I understood that, and I found then, soon thereafter I broke up with that girlfriend and ended up meeting Melanie, and I realized that we had a lot of these reasons for marriage in common, and I was like, oh, I should enter a relationship with this girl, this woman, to find out if this is going to be more. This is going to be a marriage relationship, and we very quickly determined that was the case. And so that's when I felt like I was ready to pursue marriage. And obviously that's a whole other process, and you'll learn and grow in that. But for me, if you can understand that, I think that's the key thing.
Mm-hmm. So then the next question here is, what fears did you have being in a relationship, and how did you conquer them? And so for me, this was a huge thing. I, by nature, am a very fearful and anxious person. And so you can attest to this, like I brought in a lot of fears and anxieties into our relationship. And for me, what it came down to was I feared abandonment, and I feared I had a huge insecurity of my sin and brokenness being too much for someone or for Jose. And so I had this huge insecurity of he is going to leave me because he is going to see that I am so broken, I am so selfish and sinful, and that is going to like deter him away from me. And there were times in our early relationship where I was like, no, like you're better off without me, like this isn't gonna work, I'm too broken, I'm too lost in like just the heavy weight of my brokenness. And for me, conquering that fear was really just following that fear in my thought processes. So I really had to confront like my greatest fears and my biggest nightmares, and basically had to confront them and say, you know what, at the end of the day, if I lose everything, if I am abandoned, if I am left with nothing, is Jesus truly enough for me? Like, is he big enough to fill up all of those gaps that I'm afraid of being emptied? And at the end of the day, he showed me and he proved to me that he is enough. He is enough. My hope is in him. And if I were to lose everything and he was the last one standing, he would be enough and more so. And so that was something that, in terms of my fears, and I would encourage you guys is, before you go into a relationship, you have to ask the hard question is Jesus enough for me? Is my hope in him enough? If he was the last one standing in my life, would he be enough? And I would say that's a really good foundational place to be for any area of your life, not just relationships and marriage and friendships, but every single area of your life. And yeah, that's what I found.
So as we're kind of wrapping up, I've kind of mentioned Loveology. This is a great book. If you're questioning, what's the purpose of marriage? Am I ready for marriage? I think you should definitely go read this book. It's going to totally change how you look at marriage. And another great book, another resource is Boundaries. This one's by Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend. Really good. This is going to give you kind of language that you need to talk about boundaries and understand how they're supposed to work. I think this is something as humans we tend to do really badly. So if you're figuring out how to pursue relationships, you're trying to figure out, what are my next steps, I would say go after these books, read them. You can find them pretty cheap these days. I think they'll really help you out.
Yeah, and I think you had mentioned even the Amazon Smile for Delight.
Yes.
If you guys want to go onto the Amazon Smile and use that outlet for buying these books, definitely give back to Delight. That's something that I think would be very helpful for just our community and giving back to a place that we love so much. Also, real quick before we finish off this video, we actually have more questions. You guys had sent so many questions that we actually decided to break this video up into two. So this is the first part, and the second part of the video will be coming within the next following weeks. So yeah, anything else?
I think that's it.
All right, thanks guys. Have a good one. Bye.